Hello, Disha. It is an utmost pleasure having you with us today. Thank you very much for joining. And we're very delighted to have you convene at the Young Leaders Summit to speak about innovative and disruptive solutions to accelerate climate action and elevate our deliveries on sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome our esteemed keynote speaker and delving more into her history with climate action and her background. Disha Ravi is a distinguished climate activist from India, and she has emerged as a prominent voice in the global environmental movement. She is the co-founder of the Indian chapter of Fridays for Future, and she has been instrumental in mobilizing the Indian youth across the country to demand urgent action against climate change. Disha's activism is driven by her profound understanding of the interconnectedness of environmental issues and social issues. Disha, the floor is yours, and we can't wait to hear insights from your end on the role of the youth as a center stage in forging climate action.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Disha Ravi. I'm an environmental and climate justice activist. I primarily organize with Fridays for Future India. We advocate for intersectional environmentalism, working towards a future where everyone has a voice and our planet is treated with justice and equity. So, young people worldwide, including myself, are rightfully anxious about the future. However, focusing solely on future threats and puts us at risk of painting a very skewed picture. It suggests a preference for the well-being of future generations, particularly those in the global north, for the immediate suffering of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities that are already bearing the brunt of the climate crisis. This approach, if we continue, will only guarantee failure. In India, the climate crisis isn't a distant threat, it's a harsh reality invading our homes. It's not a future event, it's already here and it's happening now. With global temperatures already exceeding 1.2 and even 1.5, according to latest reports, millions across India are feeling the brutal consequences of the rising temperatures. Less than half of India enjoys safe drinking water. Droughts, coupled with rising demand and poor water management, further worsens accessibility. This lack of safe water cripples sanitation, especially during pandemics, something we experienced very, very recently, and in some parts we're still experiencing. For some, droughts have become the grim reality of daily life, and we cannot let it continue because things like water, air, and especially clean water and air are basic necessities, and it's a basic human right. In a recent interview, India's former environment minister mentioned wanting action, not just slogans. But he never had to raise slogans. It was us citizens who have had to raise slogans and take to the streets to protest. But world leaders have pretended that they've had no power, while all this time they have the power to take action whenever they want. This is nothing but an attempt to steal our language and greenwash us into thinking that the world leaders don't have power. Equity isn't merely about equality. It acknowledges that different groups need different resources and different amounts of resources. It recognizes the unique roles we all play in society. For example, farmers need more land to cultivate than business owners do for vacations or building more buildings. Women in marginalized communities deserve priority, not because they're lesser beings or they're second to anyone, but because they're equally crucial to a just society. Equity means sharing our common resources like water, like forests, sustainably and without poisoning them. Currently, the world resources are shared, but not in an equitable manner. Lands have been looted away from indigenous people by big corporations for their greed. Water is mixed with chemicals. We've broken forests to mine coal. We've slashed trees without the blink of an eye. And we've destroyed mountains itself. And world leaders and corporations are still not satisfied. What's worse is that those demanding that our homes, our water, and our commons be left alone are being punished for it. We have jailed, beaten, starved, and laid siege to those who are the true owners of the land. But we refuse to do nothing. We don't have the privilege to stop doing anything. Our existence is very political, and so is our fight for our home. My hope lies in the people, the ones who defy the status quo and dare to envision a world beyond binaries, one where all living beings are valued. I don't expect change from leaders who preach freedom of speech on international stages while silencing dissent at home, or from colonizers who choose war without hesitation. My hope rests with everyday citizens who rise against every injustice. The main challenge we face for a better world, a more equitable world, is the lack of political will to make this happen. What they need to know that the youth are not going to stay silent. We are going to ensure that climate action is taken. The excessive need for silencing any ideas different from theirs will not hold us back. What they don't realize is that they can put people behind bars, but ideas can never be held back by bricks and iron. Because ideas aren't one person or a small group of people. Ideas are communities. They can lock us up, but they can never lock up hope or love. Love, our hope, our ideas, and our resistance for a better planet for all of us is shared by so many others, and that will never die. The kind that crosses oceans and the kind that breaks prisons and the kind that saves the planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a great intervention, Disha. We were really enlightened to hear your experience and your outlook on dealing with climate action and how the youth play an incremental role in enhancing the needle on sustainable development.
Great. First of all, Disha, thank you for your work and the amazing keynote. So, do you have? I think we have a few minutes before we jump off to the next session. So, would you be okay answering a few questions?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer a few questions.
Great. So why don't you, Disha, just tell us a little bit more about how you actually got into climate? You spoke about that you actually, you are, I think I introduced you as the co-founder of Fridays for Future India chapter. But what made you actually get into climate? Was it Greta or was it something that you saw? What was your experience been? Can you just give us a little bit of background of how you got into, and so that a lot of others who wish to get into, they will get some information of what was the first steps, first impressions when you got into the climate.
I think for me personally, it was because my my grandparents are farmers, and they had to suffer through the water crisis when I was quite young. And growing up, I thought this was the norm to not have access to like running water all the time or clean water. Um, and it was only after like I grew up and moved away from my where my grandparents live that I realized that it's not the case, and that people in different regions have access to water all the time. And it blew my mind that I had fooled myself into thinking that access to something basic was not a necessity, it was not something that people should have. And that's really why I started with my climate activism. This isn't to say that Greta didn't have an influence. I think she's absolutely phenomenal and she's a very dear friend. I think she's made some really, really huge impact. But I think for me personally, I started off differently. But I am inspired by all of the team people I work with. They're absolutely amazing. One of them being Greta, but there are like thousands of people that people don't even know the name of. People don't know where they come from, and they've inspired me just as much because they're phenomenal as well.
Fantastic. I think a lot of us came into this space like really late in our career, but I think you have already started and you gave your background on how things are moving on. But what do you see us as a nation, number one, and then of course as a world. We all know one of the funny things that I just read, and that was one of the trigger why we did this Young Leaders Summit, is Mr. Al Gore, who is the founder of Climate Reality and the first president, first vice president who actually started talking about climate. He said after the COP28 that finally the world and the people are said, okay, the climate crisis is the fossil fuel crisis. It took us 28 COPs to realize that. The point is, and still, we keep talking about the same things because there is no action as such. So what do you think India as a country is moving towards, and then what world leaders should be getting into if they have to? You already mentioned our environment minister, and then he's taking your language. But what is it that we should be doing? Like, what are the first steps that they should take in addressing this issue?
It was interesting that Al Gore finally stated that, because people on ground have been saying that for like years, almost decades, I think. So to finally have that on paper from someone quite important was refreshing. And I think what can leaders do? I think it's to acknowledge how near the climate crisis is, the proximity of the climate crisis. Because, like I said, it's always seen as a future event. It's something that's going to happen. But the truth is, it's already happening, and it's already impacting like millions of people. So, for me, a good step would be to acknowledge that it's not a future event. It's happening now, and it needs to be addressed with urgency. And the minute we acknowledge the proximity and the urgency of the climate crisis, we can take concrete steps to act on it. Because at the moment, it's like anytime someone says, "Oh, it's happening now, and this is how bad it's going to be," or "This is how bad it already is," um, they always shoot off as alarmists. But I think it's like you are very alarmed when your house is getting flooded, or it's getting washed away, or you're like you can barely live a life in because of the heat waves. It's very okay to be alarmed at those things. So I think acknowledging it is the first step to acting, because we don't have that time anymore.
But don't you think acknowledgement has already been done? Like a lot of young people are already talking about it. And a few years ago, when Greta became one of the face of the climate movements, and it also happened in India a couple of years ago. You have seen how government has responded to your activism. So, but don't you think it's little late to say we have finally acknowledged? Don't you think there should be
Oh,
more active work towards it?
I generally don't think they've acknowledged it, because every time, if you look at the actual words they're saying, it's seen as a distant event, that it's something that's going to happen much, much later on. And it's not something that's going to happen 10 years from now, because every single goal that you see, it'll be like, oh, we're going to phase down things from 2050, which is like almost 25 years from now, more than 25 years from now. And I understand India needing some of that time, but we could be faster if we received help from global north countries, from countries like the US, from countries like the UK. If we did it collaboratively instead of focusing on like the fact that it's distant. So action can only happen drastically if we understand how close the climate crisis is, and it's already happening now. Because I don't think I've seen that yet. If you see national news and them reporting on the climate crisis, it's often shown as a weather freak accident. It's not. It's happened because of the climate crisis. There are climate scientists who are providing data to back that up, but it's still seen as something that's a natural cause. There's nothing natural about it.
Yeah, I think what you said is really right. I'll take one question from Vishnu, who has just posted it on the Q&A section. So, in your opinion, what is the difference between uh, climate regulators or policy activists and climate journalism?
I honestly don't know what climate regulators are, so I don't know if I can answer that. Policy activists, from what I understand, are activists who push for better policy, if I'm not wrong. But I think the difference is between journalists and policy activists is um, journalists have a responsibility to hold governments accountable. There's reporting of events, past, present, potentially future, based on data, and a need to hold people accountable for not people, leaders, what be it, like politicians, world leaders, or even corporations, them accountable for things they've said and all of that. Policy activists, from what I understand, and I could be entirely wrong, are people who push for better policies. Their only aim is to push for a policy that's more equitable, that's better for the planet, assuming climate policies, or better for the people, which it's not mutually exclusive, it's the same. So yeah, I think there's one side is more accountability, one side is just pushing for better.
Cool. I think that was the question on the audience. But Disha, I think your work has been really inspiring, and I hope a lot of young generation sees how some people are willing to put a lot at risk to get the world to listen to what is important, and the way you are doing your work is really incredible. So, hats off to you, and thank you for joining us at this summit. So, back to you, Aya. My questions are over.